Zone de
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Phantom Zoned, the monthly podcast where we dredge the lakes of hell in search of the worst that the cinematic world has to offer. We then take these movies and we put them on trial for their various crimes against humanity. And if they should be guilty, we launch them far, far into the vast recesses of space to what you may call a phantom zone. Joining me, I am Adrian Torres, of course, your host. And then joining me is Scott Daly. Hello, Scott.
Call me by my dream name.
No, we'll get to that. We'll call you by whatever you want, but not right now. And then if we make our tone deeper and deeper, we might find Matt Freeman on the other side.
That's Father Matt Freeman.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are you business casual, Father Matt Freeman?
Yes, I have my Hawaiian shirt under my vestments.
So nice. We'll get to that later. If you're confused at all and you somehow wandered upon this podcast and have no idea what we're talking about, we currently are in the month of October, the tail end of October, which is sad because that's when everything is winding down and you have to get in as many horror movies as you can at the last moment. And because we here at Phantom Zone like to, for a moment, put on a pedestal the worst of the worst and then tear it down piece by piece, we have chosen Exorcist II, The Heretic. And when I say we have chosen, I mean that literally because I gave these gentlemen, as always, a list and said, here are the offerings that are on display. Choose your poison. And Scott was very vocal in wanting to see this film.
Look, when you give me a list of 5 terrible things, you can't blame me for picking a thing that's terrible.
Technically, out of the ones that I gave you, this was one of the better viewed or better received films. I mean, on this list, we had one missed call from 2008, has a 0 on Rotten Tomatoes. Darkness Falls has like a 1.3, if that. Night of the Lepus is about giant killer rabbits, and Janet Leigh said that she did the movie so that she could go and take her family on a nice vacation, and that she's stricken most of that filming experience from her mind. And then there was another one that I'm blanking on, but that one was so bad I can't even remember what it was.
Don't blame me, Scott. I wanted to see Night of the Lepus.
Well, look, here's why I picked this movie. The Exorcist is a great movie. It's an iconic movie. It's one of the most well-known scary movies out there. And this movie is rather infamous for being not only one of the worst sequels ever, but one of the worst movies of all time. So I thought it would be very interesting to dive into that movie because I had never seen it. I just had heard about it. So that's why I picked it. I thought it would be. It's October. It's Halloween time. If we're gonna look at a bad movie, let's look at a bad sequel to an iconic movie.
Oh no, I'm happy you chose it. I'm just telling you not to blame me. That's all.
No, you're usually the one who you're the second vote, Matt. So it's never directly your fault. Because you usually go with your heart. Scott wants to choose the movie I feel like he thinks that I might back down from, or that he's excited because he's going to be like exceptionally mad at it.
Well, here's my like I tend to like most movies, right? So if I'm trying to pick a movie, like I'm trying to set myself up to get mad at a movie because like I end up liking most movies. So here's a sequel to a movie I absolutely loved. So if it's really terrible, it's got the greatest percentage chance of me being mad at it. And I gotta say, mission successful because this is a fucking terrible movie.
Yeah, I mean, most ironically, despite the fact that we're attempting to find the worst movies ever, all the movies we've looked at so far have been pretty watchable. So we've got to do better at doing worse.
Okay, I mean that's more than fine. I'm up to that task, and I'm glad that you're on board for it. At the same time, let's mark this point right here because you're aboard the train. I'm aboard the train. If Scott decides to jump off in the middle of it, this is the point where we decided to go far into the deep end of a very shallow pool.
All right.
I'm in.
All right.
I'm in.
You say that now. In a month or two, we'll see what happens. So that's all I gotta say. Okay. Exorcist II, The Heretic, is named The Heretic for a reason that kind of sets everything in motion, but plays a very small part in the entire film.
This is what I wanted to ask before we got into this.
Yeah.
Who is the heretic? Is it
Marin.
supposed to be who?
Marin. That's the whole idea. The whole reason that it's called the Heretic and the whole why this is sent in motion is because we have the cardinal who plays very coy because is very cardinal and regal until his attendants are not quite out of the room but still staring directly at him in a doorway, and then it's like, oh, I'm gonna break character and drop down and be like, oh, Lamont, my good buddy, nice to see you, because I guess that's how cardinals can't act. But the whole mission that the cardinal and what we're led to believe is Rome end up asking Father Lamont, who is a former pupil of Father Marin from the first film, who performed the exorcism. He was by Marin's side for years, kind of was under his wing when it came to exorcism. But as years went by, Lamont moved away, didn't believe in the practice that Marin taught anymore. And the cardinal has asked Lamont to go to Washington, basically, dig into the case of the death of Father Marin from the first film, find out what happened, find out if Marin did anything uncouth or wrong, because there are rumblings in the church that he had lots of problems and that he is, in fact, a heretic and was consorting with the devil as opposed to trying to banish the devil.
Well, that makes complete sense. Now I love the movie. Thank you.
If that's the only problem you had with the movie, then that's a completely different discussion we need to have.
This movie is like, it's crazy. Like, and you know, you take a movie like The Exorcist, and of course, The Exorcist is one of the most successful horror movies of all time. It made gobs of money. It was the first horror movie nominated for an Academy Award. Like, of course they're gonna make a sequel. And this setup, to me, makes sense. Like, to set it up as the first movie is called The Exorcist, so the instigating conflict of the sequel is someone investigating The Exorcist to see if what happened was legitimate or not. That's an interesting setup, but it takes that and it just flushes it down the toilet like almost immediately. And part of that is all Linda Blair's fault.
Well, I mean, she's not the only one to blame. And while the first movie was a huge success, this movie itself, as hated as it is, was a giant success as well. Just to get the numbers out there right away, it ended up making $30 million at the box office.
Well, yeah, that's because everyone saw it, because there was no internet to tell them don't go to see it.
Yeah,
because everyone.
But I'm still saying it was. There's plenty of films throughout time that were sequels and that were bad and had nobody go to see them because word of mouth said, hey, don't go see it. But still, the fact that it made $30 million in 1977 money, and that was over triple the budget of the film.
Well, yeah, because
at the time.
It spent, was it $14 million? Which
I read that it spent like just a hair over 10.
Because I know that it was the most expensive film produced by was this just Warner Brothers, right? Yeah. It was the most expensive film produced by Warner Brothers at the time, and I read that part of that was because none of the locations they shot at in the original Exorcist would let them come back, so they had to rebuild the sets entirely, which is hilarious. They probably read the script and was like,
Well, the story behind the script is that the original script for the movie was supposedly quite good, and that's why Linda Blair came back for it. But they were constantly rewriting the film on set, and that's when things became a horrible mess. Not that you couldn't tell on screen.
So we've got our instigating point, and then we cut over to our introduction to Regan, who 4 years removed from her exorcism seems like she's doing quite well. She's tap dancing next to a guy playing a tuba. I don't even know what instrument he's playing.
Yeah,
it was a tuba.
She's going to therapy, but we don't actually understand why she would be going to therapy, because she seems like a perfectly well-adjusted person.
And it's a doctor that's poking and prodding to bring back that trauma, because Reagan's like, oh, I'm totally fine. We don't really have to talk about this. And the doctor's like, no, Reagan, we must.
Your memories are repressed.
Then you're going to destroy the world. And it's like, whoa, why? That seems a little extreme, Doc.
Just dancing and flirting with tuba guy. I don't understand why. So
she's happy at Tap Academy or wherever she's going.
That's my this movie, like the location and the geography of the film are so confusing, and it's because this movie doesn't believe in establishing shots. We cut from one scene to the other without establishing the location, what it is, where it is. It's crazy. So is this Tap? Is this the same place that the psychiatric stuff is going on? I don't know. I don't understand.
Yes, this is all in the back of Carnegie Hall. It's the side that you never see, but it's the price that you pay if you want to put on a good performance. And I guess in 1977, Tap was really, really big. I don't believe that, because I think that White Nights, or whatever it was called, a couple of years later with Gregory Hines and Morel Baryshnikov wasn't out yet. So, that was the height of Tap.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's Adrian Torres with random facts about movies that none of us have ever heard about.
Yeah, I mean, you spend the first few minutes of every scene trying to figure out where you are and why you're there, which is not a good way of making your way through a film.
And it like the direction, like it's nonsensical. Like the movie stops and focuses on certain things for no reason. I mean, we've already talked about the tap exchange. There's another scene where Reagan comes in and she's looking through the mirror at some kid who's like getting hit on the head by another kid and just laying there kind of like with his head on his side. And they just stare at each other for a while. And it has nothing to do with anything. It's never like, it never ties back in anything. I guess you could argue it ties into Reagan's psychic powers, whatever.
Yeah. Because that's the girl that she gets to speak, who apparently has a horrible stutter, is very shy, may have autism apparently, but we're only told that she says she has autism while she has a stutter, and when she could have easily just been like, I don't speak, I have a stutter, and then her stutter goes away, and you're like, wow, that's okay, we understand that, as opposed to her just.
Well, my interpretation of all that was that she was severely autistic and was completely mute, and she only started talking when Reagan started talking to her. But
yeah,
there I go defending the film.
No, I think you're right, but I don't think this is 1977. I don't think they fully understood what autism was yet.
Yeah,
and it's kind of a very insensitive portrayal of autism. But we're jumping ahead a little bit. But this is all to be said that there's so many different things going on in this movie, and none of them really make sense, and they certainly don't tie together.
No.
We haven't even gotten to the magic mind linking machine.
You just a second ago you were worried about jumping all over the place, but that kind of fits in the spirit of this film, because there's points where you have no idea where you. But like even later in the movie, even if it doesn't really matter, you're like, why are we here? Why are we still here? And not only why are we here, but what is this place? Because we never find out what that therapy place thing is. Is it part of a hospital? Is it part of a mental hospital? Is it a wing of a hospital? Is it just a giant private practice place? Why are the doors automatic and seem like they're out of maybe some Star Trek or futuristic movie? We never get a clear understanding of the aesthetic of the place. Why there aren't blinds, but they have a dimmer that dims not only the lights in the room but also the tint on the window. There's a whole bunch of children who are not in therapy but happen to be running around finger painting, beating each other on the head, but parents are coming and going, so it's kind of a daycare, but all the kids that are there are about 5 to 6 years younger than Reagan. So why she's specifically coming here, we don't really know. With a doctor who looks tremendously like Ellen Bernstein, who played the mom in the first movie, which was the entire idea from the beginning that they were going to bring Leslie Fletcher in to replace Ellen Bernstein, who didn't want to come back for the film, and then decided, no, let's not have that be a thing. Let's have her be this doctor, and we'll just constantly mention that the mom, who looks exactly like the doctor, is nowhere to be seen.
Yeah, that and who is the other woman who's like the doctor's assistant, but then she's also living with Reagan, or is that a different character?
That's Sharon Spencer. See, she is Reagan's guardian because her mom is on set at a movie, I guess.
She's listed as her on Wikipedia as a friend of Reagan's mom, who's also Reagan's mentor and legal guardian, because apparently in the 70s, if you went off to a movie set, you basically gave up custody of your child for a period of time.
Yeah, that's true. That's
okay.
Okay. Scott knows all about laws in
I'm
1970s.
all about my
so.
my 70s adoption and guardianship laws.
Now that's all based on your experiences just continually watching irreconcilable differences growing up, right?
Absolutely. So what? Here's my question: Dr. Jean Tuscan, who is Louise Fletcher's character, what is she a doctor of? Because we see her. She invents a mind-linking device. We see her in one scene perfecting a device for a deaf child to allow them to hear. But we also see her psychoanalyzing Reagan. What is she? These are all very different practices.
She can also inject Reagan with drugs unnecessarily when Reagan seems to be totally fine. I think so my theory about all this is that, like, especially during the 70s and 60s, there were some very weird ideas of what constituted therapy and psychiatry, and a lot of really weird experimental things. So I think the fact that she seems to be kind of all over the place with what she's doing, and her practice appears to be this weird, not actually existing in reality Star Trek set. I think that's all of a piece. Like, it's basically someone in the 70s who was really into the psychiatry scene was probably like, yeah, we're gonna have one of these types of psychiatry clinics that probably didn't exist anymore by the time the movie came out, and they wanted to depict that though and show how awesome it was, that everyone should do it and get their Inception dream machine on.
Yeah, got to get your tone hypnosis going.
Yeah, well, not just hypnosis. It's literally a telepathy machine.
Yeah.
It is the machine from Inception.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah, and this is just glossed over, and it's just like, whatever. Yeah, I got this telepathy machine here. Just plug in.
It's super casually brought up.
Yeah,
and there's not really any explanation of it or why it exists
or how they know how to use it. Like, there's a scene where Tuscan says, "Reagan, you know what to do." Wait, why does she know what to do?
Yep. Well, no, she said, "You remember what to do," and she asks her if she remembers what to do when she's already deep in the trance state. So Reagan doesn't really know because the doctor continually tells her, Reagan, you're going to forget this. Say it with me. I'm going to forget this. And then later on, there's even the casual part where Reagan mentions something back to her where she's like, no, remember this happened? And the lady just looks at her and she goes, Reagan, you were supposed to forget.
Right.
Well,
Right.
this is my one of my main problems with this movie is there is no inciting incident. Like, Richard Burton's character is coming to investigate the legitimacy of the exorcism and of Father Merrin, and through this we discover that the demon that we thought was exorcised is still inside her, maybe, but like it's only brought out as a result of these people's tinkering. So like
Yep.
the conflict is solved by just everyone just not doing anything. There's nothing. There's no time constraints. Like everyone, there's no danger here until it's created by the movie itself. Like nothing was happening. Like Reagan seemed fine.
Yeah, it starts out when they decide to mess with it, and then it gets worse with Lamont. But when we first, there's two instances that we see Lamont directly off the bat that set the tone for things being weird and dialogue being cuckoo bananas. Because the first time we see him is he is performing an exorcism somewhere in Latin America. And when I say he's performing an exorcism, he's babbling a little bit and then staring in horror as a girl who's possessed decides to set herself on fire. Part of the reason why he is in horror in that scene, as we learn later in the movie, is because Father Lamont's tactic when it comes to, oh, hey, there's a fire, I should put it out, is to grab a wooden crutch and beat the fire to death. And since in Latin America, in this random church they were in, had no crutches, there was no way for him to save that girl, who would have also died from internal injuries with him beating her with said crutch.
Yeah, so
All true.
But the second time we see him is the scene that we already mentioned, where he's talking with the cardinal. And when he's talking with the cardinal, there's a couple lines that they throw out that just kind of make you pause and go, wait, what are we talking about here? Give us more background on what's going on, because you're not really making a lot of sense. The Society of Jesus is on the watch of what the church is doing right now. Who are the Society of Jesus? Oh, that's not important. Okay. What do you have to say next? Oh, Satan has become an embarrassment to our progressive views. Really? What were your progressive views in 1977 that had to pertain to Satan causing the Catholic Church to look like an embarrassment?
I love this. Yeah.
and then not only that, and then Lamont, and part of the reason why Lamont doesn't want to go on this journey and look into the exorcism is he says, today, everywhere I see evil, God has fallen silent. That's exactly what you want to hear your father say. You want this religious individual to be like, I don't know, God doesn't really care right now. You guys are on your own.
Maybe that's why he sucks at exorcism so much.
And then he has the ability to teleport, which doesn't make sense, because directly after he talks with the cardinal, he stares off into space, and then the next direct shot of him is at the child's therapy whatever place, where he just happens to know this is the doctor that Reagan's seeing. I should go talk to her.
It's not him walking into the building. It's not him greeting anyone. It's him in the room with Dr. Tuscan, already mid conversation. And this is like, I'm working on post production on a short film me and a group in Dallas are working on right now, and we're realizing that there's a few places where we left out establishing shots, and we need to go back and shoot some real quick establishing shots just to say, hey, look, this is where we are, this is what's going on. So how can a movie that spent over $10 million forget to do this? And I really think they just had, like, this movie, apparently the original cut of this movie was 3 hours long. And the movie as it stands right now is 2 hours long, which is crazy. I think they were just cutting wherever they could. Like, I refuse to believe that they didn't film these establishing shots. Like, there's no way. But I think they yanked everything that they thought wasn't vital to the story. And it's
what story?
Thank you.
I mean, yeah, as you say, there are whole swaths of this movie that could have been cut out. I don't even know if we're going to get to like the Africa part, which could have just been completely cut out. I mean, it's interesting because it had some interesting aspects to it. That's my kind of main point about this movie is it seems like there were actually some smart people who had influence on this movie, but there were too many different people who had influence on this movie. So you have these really bizarre stylistic shifts and tonal shifts and story elements that just come in and then leave and make no sense. And James Earl Jones, for some reason, yeah.
And this was 77 was Star Wars, right? So this is mid Star Wars James Earl Jones.
Yeah, that was surprising. I thought he looked really young.
Yeah, well, he was really young because he hadn't done a lot towards the beginning of his career. The movie version of The Great White Hope, which was 1970, was one of the first big things that James Earl Jones was in. So he'd been around for a couple years, but he didn't have a lot that was as big as this. We can definitely get to the Africa scene. It's kind of hard to jump to because even the movie has trouble doing so. But when they're using the telepathy machine, the movie has a weird way of what it wants to show us what's going on, and then just kind of telling us what's going on. And that happens a lot with the telepathy machine, where they're going deeper and deeper, and then they're somehow bringing the other person deeper and deeper into the telepathy. And Richard Burton's character, Father Lamont, ends up deciding to use the machine after Reagan's been using it, because all of a sudden Dr. Tuscan seems like she's trapped and is convulsing. And Reagan goes, "I don't know what to do." And Richard Burton magically goes, "Oh, I know exactly where she is," and puts on the headset and goes in to see what's going on. And he is seeing a recreation of Father Merrin's death, while the demon, while he was doing the exorcism of the demon from the first movie. And they come back to the scene a second time after this when they're using the machine again, and they keep on telling Reagan to go deeper and deeper, and that somehow takes us to a younger Father Merrin, who through voiceover is describing of his meetings with and dealings with Pazuzu, and this young Ethiopian boy. Pazuzu, for people who don't know, is in the first movie. While they never directly say that that's the name of the demon in the first film, there's a shot early on in the Middle Eastern country that Father Merrin's in, where he's standing kind of on the little cliffside, and there's the giant demonic statue is actually a recreation of a statue of Pazuzu. And so it does
Pazuzu
tie
is
back.
A real demon?
Yeah, but Pazuzu's a real demon,
quote unquote real.
Because
that's a terrible name. It's awful.
Yeah, that's so disappointing. There are so many better demon names they could have gone with.
Do you have any that you throw out there for
him? Yeah, hold on. Let me look up my list of demon names.
Just got that handy on my phone. Never know when you're gonna need it.
Exactly, a demon Rolodex. You never know when you're gonna.
I mean, just think about from what was the movie called Fallen? Azazel.
Yeah.
Right? Isn't that like an infinitely cooler name?
Yeah, there's one in The Conjuring 2 that's pretty good too. It's just like this. All the decisions in this were so stupid. Like, and it kind of retroactively ruins The Exorcist, at least for me. Like, I didn't see this as just some random demon who it's apparently some random locust demon where we introduced locust swarms. I don't know. I guess the idea came from the biblical plagues or something. So they just
Yeah, somehow Pazuzu is like a spirit demon of the air. Like he does have control over um, the creatures of the air. I don't know if it's directly just locust based, or if at that point in time he was really into locusts, because he really sides into those locusts for the majority of the movie.
Well, Wikipedia informs me that Pazuzu was a Babylonian demon. He's not even a Christian demon. There are plenty of they could have had Oriax. They could have had Abaddon.
These are all bigger names.
Could have had Azazel. Could have had Andromalius. I'm just there's hundreds of names here, by the way.
But we're basically showing that once again the film's causing problems with itself because it couldn't even take the time to choose a Christian demon.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Not only did they not choose a Christian demon, but they chose a name that I keep confusing with my kids' puzzle game Pazingo. And I was actually lovingly calling my children Pazuzu tonight because it's such an adorable sounding name.
Well, and it gets stuck into your head when the film says it 42 different times.
Mm-hmm.
And I made sure to count every single one of them because
I can't believe you did that.
They said it a lot. Well, yeah, they said that 42 different times. They say evil 20 different times. And I forgot to count the number of times that they say James Earl Jones' character's name, which is Kukomo. Because there's literally just a scene where Linda Blair is Linda Blair's just staring at the at the camera, just going Kokomo, 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 with shots of Richard Burton walking through this weird African town, just turning to people and going Kokomo, Kokomo, and they're like, oh yeah.
Can we just okay, so let's get to Africa because I want to get to Africa because it's so wonderful.
Well, to get to Africa, we have to make a pit stop in what may be Africa or some Middle Eastern country that we're never really given the name of, because when they're using the telepathy machine, and if none of this sounds like it's making sense when we're describing it, this is how the movie's conveying it to us. So we don't really know. They're using a telepathy machine that Reagan and Father Lamont are connected to. Somehow through their telepathy, they're able to travel back in time and enter the brain of Father Mirren so he can continually give his voiceover of what he's thinking and doing. I don't know a lot about telepathy, but I know that that's not how it works.
But then we go into the mind of Pazuzu, I guess, because we fly on his locust back.
So is he giant? Is he a giant locust, or is he just a locust?
I don't even think he's a locust. I mean, I don't know why they were so tied into the locust, but
because the wing rubbing. Because if they rub you with their wings, you turn evil forever.
Exactly. Simple.
Anyways, while they're in the telepathy machine and they see Father Mirren helping out this young Ethiopian boy, in order to take care of him, they take him to this weird cliffside place. There's a I don't know if it's a holy palace or whatever, because unfortunately I'm not a biblical scholar and I don't even know if this was a biblical thing because it may have been a Babylonian thing, as it turns out. With
I think you're giving the movie too much credit. I'm sure
it's a place that's holy in some way on the side of a cliff, and the only way to get up to it is by shimmying yourself between two giant rocks with a giant pit underneath you until you get to the very top where there's an 8-foot rope attached to a chain to help you up, because apparently that's all the money they could really supply for this place. But they go inside and Marin is able to cast Pazuzu out of the body, and it flies, knocks a guy down the chasm, who falls for literally about 35 seconds, and one of the best / worst dummy falls of all time. the movie's worth it just probably for that scene, because not only does it typify how horrible everything is, but it's really funny when it shouldn't be at all. But that's how we see Pazuzu then ends up getting loose into the world. We don't know if Pazuzu goes into anyone else for a long period of time, but since Father Lamont has seen this place, he decides to search it out and see if anybody who's there knows of when Father Marin was there. If they know anything about the boy that he helped take care of, because at the same time that he sees Pazuzu fly out of this boy, he then flies all around the globe to Africa, where an adult James Earl Jones, who played the boy, ends up roaring like a lion at Pazuzu and scares him off. And Father Lamont decides that he needs to find James Earl Jones so he can learn how to roar like a lion, because that's the only thing that can make Pazuzu afraid. How that ties back to clearing Father Mirren's name of being a heretic, I don't know.
It doesn't. And here, this movie has no stakes. There's no stakes to this movie. So Father Marin defeated Pazuzu when Kokomo was a little kid, and then the demon escaped. It eventually, I guess, possessed Reagan, but they defeated it again. But nothing happened in between. Like, there's no, like, and I don't need every movie to be, the stakes to be, oh, the world's gonna end or something. But you have to, like, someone has to be in danger, and it doesn't seem like anybody's in actual danger here.
Well, not only that, but it robs kind of the beauty of one of the scenes that people loved in the first Exorcism film, is the fact that when Karras asks Marin, he goes, "Why did the devil," who of course it turns out that it's not the devil, but still, just for the sake of the first movie, he asks why the devil would do such a thing, and Father Marin mentions that the devil would choose somebody like a child to test our humanity, and to make us doubt our faith. But it turns out that Pazuzu's just kind of a dick and doesn't really like Father Marin, apparently.
Well, and he likes possessing people with magical powers, because apparently magical powers are gifts from God that are going to eventually be given to everyone. But Pazuzu wants to take the.
Yes, because in this movie, Reagan is a powerful psychic and a healer, actually, which we didn't know before. But now we know.
She is the good locust. She is the good locust. He calls it. She's not somebody who has magic powers. She is the good goddamn locust, because that's what they call her at least 5 times in the last 20 minutes of the movie.
Well, that's like, so this whole, like, in the middle of the movie, we go to Africa for 30 minutes. For 30 minutes of this 2-hour movie. And it's racist as fuck. And it is pointless. It is absolutely pointless. Richard Burton wanders around Africa, does nothing, finally meets up with James Earl Jones, who just says to him, "We've engineered a locust that calms the swarm down."
Hold on.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I got the part where he's wearing a giant locust costume.
Exactly, because he doesn't just meet James Earl Jones. It turns out that the majority of his wandering around the Africa town place may not have actually happened and may have been a hallucination.
Yeah, or the part in the hospital is a hallucination, which I genuinely have no idea.
No, we don't, because we see him wandering around town, continually asking about Kokomo, until some old guys are like, "Kokomo? Oh, Kokomo!" and then go and show him a naked young girl, and then laugh in his face, which causes him to turn around really upset, and then senses that Kokomo might be this way, and then starts wandering down a path until he comes to a guy who points to this cave structure, and he's going into this cave structure that reminds me of the third Indiana Jones movie, because he's walking along, walks into this cave and sees somebody at the end of the cave, and it's adult James Earl Jones wearing a giant locust on his head. Like he's wearing it as a crown. If in a Conan movie, Conan had killed a giant locust and it was like, I will wear you now. That's exactly what he looks like.
I can tell you right now that's going to be the picture for this episode.
It should be. That should be what we all go as for Halloween, because it's amazing and serves no purpose, because he ends up having a conversation with James Earl Jones that's about his James Earl Jones calling out Father Lamont's slipping of faith and possibly letting evil into his heart, and the fact that he doesn't have the strength to move forward, and that he needs to let go if he wants to test his faith to learn the power that he has. And Richard Burton is choosing not to take a step in front of him, because there's a step or like a little pool of maybe 2-inch deep water that looks like it has spikes of some kind that are sticking out of it. He takes a step forward, lands on the spikes, and just as his face is just about to hit the final spike and kill him, it turns out that he's in a hospital where James Earl Jones is a doctor. And it's not just a hospital, it's a hospital that looks like it's dedicated entirely to locusts.
Which to me, I was immediately like, this is a hallucination. Like this is unrealistic. This is a metaphor. I mean, it's obviously a metaphor, because James Earl Jones is not really talking about a locust. He's talking about Reagan. So have they built a whole wing of this hospital-looking building in order to raise insects, so that when Father Lamont arrived, they could show him this metaphor about locusts and how Reagan was the good locust? Or was it all just a coincidence that he stumbled into a locust hospital?
I think it's a magical coincidence. Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, it makes sense at a certain, like, that James Earl Jones, as a child, dealt with the locusts and became a scientist. And what we're seeing in Africa, when we're seeing the wing of the facility, is what Africa actually looks like, and not the terribly racist, regressive stuff we've been seeing up until this point. But none of this makes any sense, because Father Lamont has never been shown to be losing faith, or we've never actually seen him be tempted by the dark side, for lack of a better phrase. Like, the only thing we see is he can't find Kokomo, and then he calls out to Pazuzu to help him find him instead of praying to God. Or he does pray to God, waits 5 seconds, God doesn't show him the way, so then he calls out to the demon. But
they do kind of. I know this is giving the movie credit, and it deserves absolutely none whatsoever. But early on in the movie, they do have him questioning his faith. It's not really quiet questioning. It's a whole bunch of yelling, because the first 2-3 scenes that he has with Louise Fletcher, he's just constantly yelling at her, and that he needs to figure out what the hell is going on with Reagan, because that's the only thing that that's gonna give him any solace, because he's just constantly yelling at her. It's especially in the scene where Reagan is drawing a picture that ends up having flames around him, that leads to him instinctually knowing, oh, this means that there's a fire here somewhere in the building. She's trying to warn us that there's a fire, and that's what leads to him going, oh, a fire. I know how to take care of this. There's a wooden crutch over here. I'm just going to continually beat this fire that's growing around me as I'm beating it with this wooden stick. Why isn't this working? Oh, goodness, that picture that she drew was actually about me being surrounded by this fire while I'm hitting it with a wooden crutch. And he keeps on yelling at Louise Fletcher that he wants to figure this out because he wants, I guess he wants to prove that Marin wasn't really crazy, because then he can have more faith in God, I guess. I mean, they've got a random section where he goes, he flies to Washington to meet up with Sharon, who they were both in New York. They could have easily gone together, but apparently they took two different flights to wind up in front of the same house from the original movie. So Sharon can give a long conversation about, ever since the events of that night, she's felt really close to Regan, and that she has to be by her side because she doesn't feel safe or correct, basically, if she's away from Regan for too long.
This is ironically a woman who was not even in the first movie, right?
Yeah, and this is ironically a woman who, when Regan starts to feel, I guess the demon tried to take hold of her again, and causes her to sleepwalk, to not be there, because there's several scenes where Regan has the pull of Pazuzu, I guess, inside her. Not really so much trying to get out, but just making the presence known. Because there's a scene where Pazuzu's trying to take Regan somewhere, and Regan wakes up and is on the very edge of the balcony of the posh apartment that I don't know if her mom owns or Sharon owns, because nobody discusses it. But all we know is that there's a giant, really weird, what looks like an art installation that doubles as a birdhouse for doves on this rooftop.
It's modern art / birdhouse.
Basically, because Regan wakes up, screams because she's about to fall off the like 70th floor of this building in New York, and Sharon comes running from the other room and sees her and is like, "Regan, what's wrong?" And Regan's just there, and she goes, "Oh, it's nothing. I'm just feeding the doves, just like you do." I don't.
So that scene, actually, just to know how much of a dick director John Borman is. Linda Blair, the screams when she was on the edge of that building were real, because there was no safety harness or anything. I doubt it was fully 70 floors up, but it was up rather high, and they didn't hook her into anything. So she's actually afraid for her life there, because that's apparently how we make movies these days. Or back in the 70s, at least. So I'm just like, guys, I'm trying to wrap my head around this movie, and I can't. Because, like, we just jump around. It's not really about anything. Like, and you're right, Matt. There's little through lines, like, where something's clever. Like, the idea of testing Burton's faith. They already kind of did that in the first Exorcist, but that's a good little nugget. The idea of returning to a character who's been possessed years later, and exploring how they're dealing with that. That's interesting, but it just doesn't do anything.
Yeah, and obviously, there's other kind of demonic type horror movies where some of the movie will be spent like, okay, we must go on this archaeological dig to understand what's happening here, and you realize that, like, they released it from the crypt, and then you have to use the magical talisman or whatever. But usually, I guess part of the problem here is we don't understand any of the mechanics of what's happening, if that makes any sense. Like, when it comes to The Exorcist, the original, you understood that the reason why they weren't able to defeat the demon was essentially that they didn't have sufficient faith.
Uh-huh.
And the only reason they were able to defeat it ultimately was a combination of having, finally mustering up enough faith and enough courage and sacrificing themselves, and then they were able to defeat the demon. And like, the movie walks you through this logic of, like, okay, this is how the Christian conception of demons works, and redemption and power of God over Satan and so forth. But in this movie, it's just there's a bad demon and we're going to go to Africa because it came from Africa, even though I think Babylon is in the Middle East.
It did, yeah. Did it come from
Well,
like? Oh, God.
But they are in the Middle East for a short period of time because that's where the Cliff Sanctuary place is.
Okay.
Was it?
Yeah, you're right.
But yeah, well, I know this sounds bad, and I'm not trying to profile, but if you have to go with the through line of the film is that the people that they have at that the sanctuary area are basically of Middle Eastern descent. I'm not going to be rude to any of them and try to pinpoint exactly what region or ethnicity they were, but they do look for that time period of when the movie was made, that image that you had in your mind of people who were of Middle Eastern descent. So yeah. I can give that to them, but the movie never says. They don't have any title cards, and it's weird the shift that we've taken in movies, going from having films like this where they don't they explain a lot of stuff but not what's important, to last night I went to a screening of the of Inferno, the new Tom Hanks Robert Langdon film, and there's probably not more than 4 to 5 minutes at a time that go by without there being a title card that comes up that tells you the time of day and where they are, and then not only where they are in the country, but what building they're in or what hall of this room they're going into, so that you know exactly where they are at all times. And this film is just like they're somewhere else. Yeah. They're not in New York. They're not in Washington. That's all you really need to know. And but to give people an idea about the issues that you have with this movie, just by piecing things together, is Father Lamont says directly at about an hour and 28 minutes into the film, he says to Reagan, "I was told good and evil are battling inside you." An hour and a half into a 2-hour movie of The Exorcist, the main character says to the person who spent the entire first movie possessed, good and evil's fighting inside you.
Hey, movie. No shit. Look, but is that really even what the movie's about? Because wouldn't it be? It seems to more be about that good and evil are battling inside of Father Lamont. Like, Jesus, this movie.
Well, they're fighting inside of Sharon. They're fighting inside of basically everybody.
Well, it actually seems like the only person they're not really materially fighting inside of is Reagan, because she just Reagan is completely angelic, but then like when she's asleep or in a trance, she sort of becomes more Pazuzu dominated, but she's actually completely fine, and she has no inner struggle. Like she has no struggle. Like at least Lamont at one point like confesses to a priest that he's like obsessed with demonology and has and is struggling with his pride. Like if anything, his isn't really a test of faith. He actually kind of passes his test of faith. It's just that he's really prideful, and he like wants to be the guy who defeats the demon. And that could have been a very interesting thing there, because okay, here's what I thought this movie was going to be, genuinely, and this would have been much better in my opinion. I thought that Pazuzu was like trapped somewhere, and he was manipulating this arrogant, prideful priest into going through all the steps necessary to like find out where he was trapped and free him. The priest the whole time thinking that he was doing good and going to defeat the demon, but actually he's just doing the demon's bidding, because he's making very sort of the minor sinful steps at every step of the path, where a more virtuous priest would have just been like, no, it is not my place, or whatever, but that's not what happened.
Yeah,
man. Would you be mad if I told you that you were about 90% correct
In terms of what they were trying to do?
in terms of what they were trying to do? Because I was going to start on the horrible path that the movie starts to take in the last 45 minutes, that tries to piece together basically what you were saying, but not in a very good fashion. Because they start to leave you little hints, with a turn that Father Lamont is starting to take, because he's slowly not really fully engaging. Part of that's because of the fact that as the shoot went on, Richard Burton was basically drunk every single day on set. So
To be
not
fair,
only
if I
is
was
this,
working on this movie, I'd be drunk every day on set too.
well, this is also around the time that Linda Blair started falling into a drug habit. So everybody had their coping mechanism basically to get through the film. But his character kind of comes in and out of focus and seems like he's both withdrawn, but then also possibly possessed. And there's little crumbs here and there, where the movie's making it seem as if by using the telepathy machine that there's instances that we're not seeing where Pazuzu's reaching out to Father Lamont and starting to influencing him more and more. Because for the last portion of the movie, he's A, partially possessed, and B, a renegade cop, basically. Because he has a scene with the Cardinal where the Cardinal's like, hey, I don't know what's going on, but things seem like they're getting crazy. You're going to foreign countries. Uh, Lots of stuff just seems weird. Your reports that you're giving back to us aren't really focusing on the Marin business that we wanted you to do whatsoever. You're way too close to this case. I'm going to need your collar and your cross on my desk. And that's directly after that when he's pleading and he says that he has to see this through, and he goes back to New York wearing his ridiculous Hawaiian shirt. He kind of shows up with Reagan and forces her to go with him back to Washington. And even though she's kind of cognizant of everything, but he's withdrawn, and then he starts yelling at people that makes it seem like Pazuzu might be influencing him. The doctor, Tuscan.
Yeah.
They don't say her name very much.
No, they don't.
Tuscan and Sharon end up going, basically realizing, oh, Lamont's kidnapped her. Oh no, that's horrible. We have to get to Washington, because they end up talking because Reagan calls them, and it's like, oh no, I'm fine. Even though a minute later they're like, oh, she's been kidnapped. Even though she says.
Again, they're establishing stakes that aren't there. Like, we have to fly to Washington right away because Reagan's in danger.
Yeah, and so they...
Like, I agree that there's a cut of this movie where Lamont is the antagonist. And maybe that's what they were going for, but it doesn't come off.
Well, he does for that period of time, and then he walks into the house where he's basically been led by Pazuzu, because Pazuzu seems like they're trapped in the room from the first film, because when Lamont gets into the house and he opens the door, there's a swarm of locusts that's back there that blows him back as first. Reagan comes up and helps him to the door, and then once he's inside the door, there's a demonic Reagan on the bed that's pleading him to come over and be with her. But then there's the angelic Reagan who's pleading with him not to do any of this. And the scene just gets weirder and weirder, but it's intercut with Louise Fletcher and Sharon coming to the house from the original one, but something hits the cab that they're in and causes it to start spinning around. in a circle while locusts are starting to swarm on the street, and the cab crashes and rolls over a whole bunch of times. But when it does that, it ends up crashing into the front of the house, which led me to go, huh. Technically, the cabbie did actually get them there.
And then dies horribly, which they never comment on. What this third act? Oh my god, none of this makes any sense. Like, and then Sharon is possessed and lights herself on fire. Who's possessing her? Is Pazuzu just possessing everybody now?
I think so. Well, so there's another thing that I thought was like really underdone in a way where you're like, wait a minute, is this happening or not? Where when they're trying to get from wherever they are to Washington, everyone in the world is just huge jerks to them and like shoving and like that's my cab, and it's like, okay, so is what's happening here that like everyone is becoming jerks because Pazuzu is like putting his touch upon the world, or is this just a more general cynical statement? Or I mean, I have to assume. Well, see, I mean, I really do have to assume that they did that on purpose, because there's so many little touches where the character, like where extras basically seem like they're just being unnecessarily violent and harsh to each other. But it's not. It's like only in that part of the movie. It's only in that like 10-minute part of the movie, so you're not. It just catches you off guard. Just to on what you guys were saying, I think that the movie would have been actually improved if Lamont had just died like the moment he opened that door, like when the locusts hit him. Because, okay, first of all, it would have been better if he hadn't been possessed, if he had just been like really, really certain of himself.
Mm-hmm.
And basically just made a mistake and been like, yes, we're going to go defeat the demon. And then he opens the door and the demon just kills him immediately with his swarm of locusts. And then the demon is like, all right, Reagan, now I'm going to get you. And then Reagan has to have her own struggle with it. And then Reagan would actually have a struggle, because Reagan has no struggle in this movie. So he's just like, no, everyone be good.
Yeah. And that's a really good point, because you could even like the reason. The Exorcist movie is iconic because of the possession makeup, right? And I know that Linda Blair refused to be put in the makeup for this movie.
Yes, it's her stand-in for. So every scene that they show somebody in the cracked face demon makeup, it's her double who had to sit through like 3 or 4 hours of makeup every single day, because Linda Blair said that she didn't want to do so.
So I understand why they can't use that for her. They did it every so often, but they did it very sparingly, because obviously her double doesn't look exactly like her, and if you use it too much, they could tell. But so do it to Lamont, make him possessed. Like allow. Like, let's say he walks through that door and then Pazuzu fully possesses him. And then it's kind of a reverse of the previous movie where Reagan's the one trying to exorcise him now. That's at least something new and interesting and makes a little bit of sense. But
oh, wait. You want new and interesting? How do you feel about a priest who's been, I don't know if he's just off the case or if he's been excommunicated at this point, but how would you feel about a priest / ex-priest gut punching a demon in the body of a girl wearing a nightgown, who then through her gut somehow pulls out her heart?
That sounds just really wonderful. And it doesn't make
sense. It's exactly what happens, because he's on top of her in what looks like he's going to make out with the demon version of Reagan. When we say demon version of Reagan, at this point, she's not.
She's just Reagan.
Linda. It's Linda Blair with contacts in a nightgown, basically. And he straddles her on the bed for a second and looks back at Reagan, and it looks like he's going to be making out with the demon. And then the house starts breaking apart while locusts are swarming all over the place. And then all of a sudden you see him just start punching her in the side and then reach in and pull out a heart into his hand.
What the fuck? What?
This is while, as we said, Sharon has immolated herself outside because she's been possessed, and she says she can't go through with this anymore, even though whatever demon's possessing her is giving a speech that no one really cares about.
Like this whole thing is just crazy, and I looked it up. Linda Blair was 18 when this movie was released, which means there's a very good chance she was 17 years old when they were filming the scene where a priest jumps on top of her and starts kissing her, and then eventually heart rips her. That just it was icky to me. It felt very weird. But none of this this is supposed to be the conceit of your movie. This is supposed to be where everything was leading, and none of this matches anything that was set up before it. I don't know what anything has to do with anything. I don't know what the locust have to do with anything. I mean, The Exorcist was a successful movie because it was pretty simple. I mean, it was you have a priest, you have a possessed girl. You can see the possession very easily through this excellent special effects and makeup. It's a simple movie with a simple premise and a simple resolution. They just tried to do so much stuff with this movie and explain things that didn't need explaining. We didn't need to know what the name of the demon was. We didn't need to know where he came from. We didn't need to know exactly how Father Marin died. We knew that the demon killed him. It was very heavily implied. We didn't need to actually see the scene of possessed Reagan like grabbing his heart.
No, grabbing what's her face? Grabbing Dr. Tuscan's heart.
I don't even know. This
more so
movie,
massaging her boob. Where the scene where you have basically dual Reagans massaging the boob / heart of Dr. Tuscan, and it just continually goes on, and Richard Burton just sits on the other side of the room, sitting silently staring at it until he says one phrase, and then the demon's like, okay, I'll stop. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make things awkward there.
There's so many weird shots like that in this movie. When you have real Reagan and possessed Reagan kind of swatting each other's hands away, where possessed Reagan's trying to reach for the heart, and like real Reagan's kind of like battling, like playing handsies with each other. It's so weird. Well, that's how the movie ends. They kill Pazuzu, I guess. And then,
do they?
Do they?
Yeah, you don't really see because they've got the bed falling up. The bed ends up falling in while the house is collapsing, and the Pazuzu Reagan gets sucked in basically into the crevice of the house, into the center of the earth, and burns up in the core. I guess I don't know, because that's all you see really is you see the Pazuzu Reagan go down. Lamont is starting to fall, and Reagan helps him up. They're able to get outside. There's nobody in the street. Lamont looks around for a second and looks, literally the first shot they have him directly after it looks like he's just walking away, done with everything, just like, well, that happened. But it turns out he walks over to Sharon, who is being cradled by Dr. Tuscan, and she lives just long enough to try to apologize and say, I chose evil. And then Lamont gives her
Did she?
Yeah, that's the last thing she says before she dies is I chose evil. And then she
But how
did she choose evil?
Yeah, when did that happen?
We never see it. But that's how we know that apparently she was possessed, because she chose evil.
What does evil even mean in the context of this movie?
I don't know. It's said 20 different times without any real purpose.
Yeah. I don't know.
But so he gives her last rites. Dr. Tuscan stands up while Reagan and Father Lamont walk off with his arm around her back. They walk off, and then all of a sudden, a whole bunch of people all of a sudden appear on the street, including police officers who are saying, "Oh, what happened here? Did anybody see what happened?" And then it just cuts to a big, bright white light. So maybe in some horrible world, this is all just part of somebody being trapped inside using the telepathy machine.
I hope so.
Yeah.
God, this
It's
movie's
interesting.
terrible.
There's like no. It's funny. There's like no instance where anything good happens in this movie. Like
I mean, the autistic girl
God.
talks.
Yeah, okay, that's true.
Well, going back to the autistic girl, it typifies lots of the issues that there are in this movie, because when she's looking at her, she's stuttering and she goes, I'm autistic. I'm withdrawn." And then keeps talking. You're like, wait a second. I'm sorry. 1970s psychosis or psychoanalysis of a film. I'm not sure that's the best way to put it in any context at any time, to have this character say that.
But then the autistic girl says, "What's wrong with you?" And Reagan says, "Oh, I have a demon inside
I was possessed by a demon once. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was possessed by a demon once.
Don't worry.
I'm better now.
I'm better
He's gone."
now."
Yeah. Well, and that scene that scene begins with Reagan cheerfully asking, "So what's wrong with you?" to a girl in the waiting room at a psychiatry clinic. Like that's an acceptable thing to do.
Well, and then, I mean, you're led to piece together. Oh, Reagan was able to use her psychic abilities to help this girl talk. But then directly after the girl mentions that she's autistic and she's withdrawn, she keeps on trying to tell her mom. She keeps on pointing at Reagan, going, "Mom, did you hear what was wrong with her? Mom, did you?" And the mom's just like, "Oh my God, my daughter's talking. It's so fantastic. We got to go take her to her dad," because she can't believe it. And the kid's still going, "Mom, no, did you hear that she was possessed? Did you?" and the kid's kind of feeling how everybody else is in the film, just like, is anybody paying attention to what anyone else is saying in this film? Because this girl's just casually tossing off, "Yeah, I was possessed. It happens. It's a usual Sunday."
And of course, part of that is Linda Blair's complete deadpan reading of a line because she can't act to save her life. It's God.
No one in this movie can, though. There's so many lines where it happens in so many different scenes where like someone will ask a question, and like a good actor would see that the next line is a non sequitur, and how you're supposed to read that line is like you look somehow upset by the question, and then you look like you're aggressively trying to change the subject. But most of the time in this movie, when that happens, someone asks a question and then the other character just kind of blankly just starts a different conversation. And then the first character just goes along with it and forgets about the question they asked.
These instances are usually caused by Richard Burton.
Yeah.
Yes.
Who's a good actor. So I have to blame Borman here. Like that's I don't know who else to blame for this. Like,
well, you can blame the writers and
I guess I can blame the
alcoholism.
Yeah.
Let's also blame Ned Beatty, who we didn't mention, who's in the film for all of 3 minutes, when Lamont needs a plane to fly to the city. That one's, I want to say, a biblical city that he's trying to fly to. And he comes across Ned Beatty, who sells religious artifacts to everybody. And even though Richard Burton introduces himself as an archaeologist, the guy automatically knows that he's a father.
I don't know how, and they don't ever bother explaining how. They just move right on from that. Okay, so
he's got to fly the plane, and he's got to explain DDT isn't able to kill all the locusts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's just used to seeing just tons and tons of priests coming through the area looking for demons.
Pretending to be archaeologists.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, I know.
This movie. Okay. I don't know what else I can say. It's an absolute mess.
Does anybody have any rays of sunshine, or is this completely devoid and just living in the blackness?
That's probably why it's frustrating. Is that I actually, okay, so I thought Loose Cannons was much worse than this movie. Like, in terms of, I had to force myself to watch Loose Cannons. I had to I had to be like, no, we have to actually watch it. You can't just pretend that you watched it. Whereas this movie, I wanted to like, I was like, oh, that's an interesting scene. It had a lot of interesting scenes that just didn't connect in an overarching plot at all. And even the interesting scenes sometimes were interesting due to just being unintentionally funny because they're so bad. And it had some cool visuals. Like, I really liked the mud city, or the mud African city where wherever they were. I thought it had a really cool aesthetic to it, and I was like, this is interesting. I'm engaged. I'm actually engaged with this movie. I'm not reading my phone, so I will even read my phone during good movies. So that's I don't know if that's a ray of sunshine, because again, that's what makes it frustrating, is that it failed on almost every level, except somewhere in the process there were involved some talented people who were doing their best.
Scott, what about you?
So I disagree that this I think my ray of sunshine, I do agree that sometimes the cinematography was really good. I don't think it was good in that, like, the technique or the style matched what they were going for, but one of the things that jumped out at me, one of the scenes where Reagan is feeding her birds on the roof, there is a scene, like, the whole roof is like metallic and reflecty weirdly.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a scene where Sharon is standing there, and the concave reflectiness of one of the walls of the roof has like cut her image into like 8 or 10 different versions of her, and that's a really cool shot on its own. I don't know, that has nothing to do with like anything that they were going for in the scene. It was probably just a DP like, hey, this looks cool, let's shoot it from this angle. That stuff's cool to see, but it doesn't, like, it's hard to say that I like it, because it doesn't, it would make sense if, like, we saw the father in that position, or Reagan, and it was indicative of, look at how they're kind of torn in multiple different ways. But it's just, other than that, that's the only nice thing I can say about this movie.
Well, no, it's a difficult movie to explain. There are plenty of scenes that are dull. The majority of the scenes are weird and don't need to be in the film. But there's something compelling about it just to get through it. I think you're spurred on because you want to see if it gets A, any weirder, or B, if it fleshes out in a way that ties it all back together. Borman, of course, before this did Deliverance, which is the Ned Beatty connection there. And he did a couple other movies. He did, I want to say, Point Blank years earlier with Lee Marvin, which was a based on a Donald Westlake book. And he goes on a couple years later after this with Warner Brothers again doing Excalibur, which this movie's insane. Excalibur is even further insane. But in the context of the story he's telling there, the insanity of Excalibur actually works, because you're already dealing with this heightened state and you're dealing with legends. And so the weird grossness that they have and the heightened characters work within that story frame that you have. Here, you're giving the same type of thing that you're working within the horror confines. You're working with demons, possession in general, people losing and questioning their faith. But the steps that they're trying to go to convey all these things don't gel, don't mesh together. Um, it it's it's sad that it ends up going this route, because there's the bare bones plot that they have. They could work into something that's interesting, but I think because of the time that it was made in, they were very much hoping to turn a profit to cash in on that.
And they did.
Well, yeah, I mean but you see what happens. I mean,
at what cost?
This movie came out in 1977, and it isn't until I think I want to say 1990 that Exorcist III comes out. So you're talking, there's 13 years where they don't touch it again. This movie made a sequel, but because of the backlash that it had from the audience, they didn't make another one in there. And this movie come out in 1977 is big because of the landscape of horror is starting to change and churn. So they were in. Had they done this right, they could have made it a huge film. They could have gone off on a giant series if they wanted. You don't have to do too much in this time period to make it to make it viable, to have a franchise where people buy in enough. But it feels like, because of all the rewrites that they had, that whatever semblance of a plot or of a movie that could have been good gets destroyed. Just like Matt mentioned with the way he would have liked the movie to have gone, those pieces are in it, and if you read in between the lines, you can see that the story wants to definitely go on that route and have that journey with Lamont. But because of the fact that they rewrote so much, because of the fact that Richard Burton was a raging alcoholic and they basically had to take what they could get with him, the movie just becomes a giant clusterfuck, and there's no other better way to put it. So it falls into a so bad it's good.
No.
I think
No,
so.
no,
I would
no.
tell people to watch the movie, but to keep in mind that it is a terrible film. It borders on campiness without the actors actually knowing that they're delving into that campy state.
See,
Which
this annoys me because there's apparently, like, this movie has garnered a cult following now. And there are plenty of movies out there that were not successful or were not liked at first that then garnered a cult following that I support because they're good movies. This I do not. This is a terrible movie. This is awful.
Oh no. I'm not saying people should have parties and watch this every single year, but I'm there's plenty of movies that we're going to have on here as time goes by. This is our fourth show, and out of the movies that we've done so far, there's not. Outside of the last one we did with I Am Wrath, because that was a special exception, there's not going to be many movies that I'm going to say, well, give it a watch at least once, because of how weird it is, and the decisions that they make in this movie are really fucking weird. There's no way around that. I don't know why they make half these choices, and explaining it to people, we probably sound like we're insane, and it probably sounds like we're leaving a lot out of the movie.
We're not.
But that's not us. That's the movie. We're describing it to you as is, and we're adding inflection, and we're making jokes, because that's the only way to really cope and fully process what you've seen. And that's why I'm saying people should see the movie to experience it themselves, to understand what we're saying, to be like, holy fuck, okay, they're serious. They're not joking around about it. So
it's possible that our explanation actually makes more sense than watching the movie, because at least we're trying to pick out a structure, whereas the movie does not help you find the structure at all. You have to do kind of like we did, where I came up with my idea of how I wish the movie had gone, and then we all agreed that may have actually been what they were trying to do at some point. But there's just too many elements, especially when you're watching it. You're just like continually in a state of, all right, when are we going to settle into the main plot?
Yes. Okay, well, I guess that brings us to the very obvious voting period. Scott, we're going to start with you. Guilty or not guilty?
It's guilty. Like, no one should ever watch this movie. This movie has a real chance of ruining the original Exorcist for you. I will not be able to watch The Exorcist without thinking of this movie, and that's terrible. I don't want that. I wish I could remove this movie from my brain like Reagan did after the first movie. Um, it's terrible. Like, and I'm usually with you on it's interesting enough that you need to see it so you can see exactly why it doesn't work. No, I don't think anyone needs to do that. This is a bad movie. Watch The Exorcist. Apparently, the new Exorcist TV show is kind of good, so watch that. Don't watch this movie. Guilty.
All right. Matt, guilty or not guilty?
I think guilty. There were some interesting scenes in this movie, but that does not make it a movie worth watching. I would add to Scott's counter recommendation, The Last Exorcism, which is a movie that I remember really liking in the theme of exorcisms.
That's a good one.
That's it.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. All right. Well, I'm going to vote guilty as well. So, everybody made fine arguments, but it's true. It's a bad, 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 bad movie. Um, if you want to see a ridiculous, over the top, horrible sequel to The Exorcist, you can skip this. And if you're able to find, you can watch Repossessed, which is a spoof on the Exorcist series that stars Linda Blair as her Reagan character, but with a different name, and with Leslie Nielsen in the Father Mirren type role. I haven't watched that movie in probably close to 15, 20 years now. I guarantee you it's worse than Exorcist 2, but it probably has more merit than Exorcist 2. Um,
Well,
so
that's true.
that's three guilty votes, which means that Exorcist 2, the Heretic, is going to be launched into the vast, vast recesses of space, into the Phantom Zone, where it can harm no one for the rest of time. Scott will never have to worry about getting into an argument with anyone else, save for the two of us, about this movie, because no one else will be able to see it anymore. Everyone is safe. We have done our part.
You're welcome,
Um,
Earth.
yeah. So there we have it. Another episode is going to come to a close here in a moment. If this is the first time that you guys have listened to this, please make sure to subscribe in general to this and the rest of the Daily Planet podcasts. Make sure to review it. You can just, I think, if you just leave a star rating, that's enough on however you're doing it. If you want to write a review, that's more than fine. The Twitter for this, of course, is phantom_zoned. You can tweet at us if you've got suggestions for what you want us to cover in the future. Next month, we are definitely 100% going to watch Heartbeeps. I know we've mentioned it a couple times, so we will definitely watch it unless something amazing comes our way. And then Heartbeeps will be the movie we never watched and ends up being whenever the final show is, and hopefully years from now.
This is gonna be like the Jimmy Kimmel show where they always say he didn't have time for Matt Damon. That's gonna be our version of it.
Probably.
Sorry, Heartbeeps. Next time.
Scott, where can we find you?
I am on the internet at Twitter at ScottDaily85. That's DALY. And also you can find our other podcasts. And Adrian, I think we're gonna maybe, Matt, we have to talk about this, but it'd be cool to split off this into its own feed. So you'll get it on the Daily Planet podcast feed, but if you want to subscribe individually to Phantom Zoned, we'll find a way to maybe do that. But all that being said, dailyplanetfilms.com is the website.
if we get to split off on our own at some point, maybe I can try to drive you completely insane and go bi-weekly. Or if you tap out, then we can have certain weeks where it's you and me, and then or Matt and I, in case people's sanity starts to wane. But
I'm always in.
But Matt, where can we find you, sir?
I'm on Twitter at @MoreDinamail. And yeah, I believe that should be technically possible. Yeah, we can look into that.
All right, that sounds good. And I can be found at Adrian Torres, because it's easier than the old one was. And at the same time, we're going to take a moment at the end here to thank a gentleman. I will give Scott the information so that we can put it on the page. But our nice little intro, theme, sting, whatever you want to call it, was provided to us by Ben Bliss. He is an opera singer who has sang basically all around the world now. I know he's done several shows and tours in Europe. He is putting on a performance at Carnegie Hall next month, I believe. Today is the 26th. This past Saturday, he was in Kansas City and did a recital that was astounding. But he is a very nice individual who wanted to help support the show, so he did that for us. So thank you, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.
We appreciate it.
All right. Thank you guys for listening, and we will see you again next month.
What's the matter with you? I was possessed by a demon. Oh, it's okay. He's gone.